Today's episode of Socially Democratic is now available on Patreon. Join our Socially Democratic community for free or for as little as $2.50 a month, and you can help support the show. And when you sign up as a campaign organiser, you get access to our premium episodes and free ticket to a live show. And plus, you get merch. Our haters hate and the rest vote Labor calico bag and stickers and all sorts of other stuff. And we'd like to thank our latest member to our Patreon community for joining, Reggie. Thank you so much, Reggie, for joining the team. And if you have signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address. Without that, we can't send you your Socially Democratic merch. And to all the comrades who have joined, thank you so much for supporting the show. Click on the link in the show's bio to join our Patreon community. Today's episode is also brought to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place, including community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses, and social democratic parties across the globe. And we train engagement staff and volunteers in the Gantz framework of leadership, organising and action. If you want to create change in your community, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. They believe the law should serve everyone and not just those who can afford it. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years, and they've helped more than 500,000 people get the compensation they deserve. If you've been injured at work or on the road, you may have a claim through your superannuation. And so for expert and empathetic legal support, get on the phone and call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that is out every Friday that dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And this is the start of our election campaign series focusing on the Queensland state election that has been going for a while now, really, but kind of formally kicked off in earnest this week. So we've got Jackie Trad, former Queensland State Treasurer and party official, and Evan Moorhead, former Queensland Labor Campaign Director, for the next 4 weeks to unpack and review the week that was in the Queensland state election. And we'll also do a post-election review after the election, which is being held on Saturday, October the 26th. So looking forward to the next 4 weeks with Jackie and Evan. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us 5 stars when you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Dunn Street, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. And let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Thursday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. It is election season in Queensland, and you know what that means. It means that we are going to do a series of episodes leading up to and beyond the poll. Queenslanders go to vote in late October. And joining me, not just today, but over the next 4 episodes, 2 people who have been on the show before, so they need no introduction. And obviously they are absolute comrades of our wonderful movement, but I will introduce them anyway. Jackie Trad, former Treasurer in the Queensland Labor government, and more importantly, former Assistant Secretary of Queensland Labor, because on this podcast, we respect the party officials. Jackie, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Great to be here.
And Evan Moorhead, former Queensland Campaign Director, Party Secretary, and now Head of an Actor. Evan, great to have you back on the show as well.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for the chance to be on.
All right.
I was former Assistant Secretary too, so just to make sure that we're all...
You were an Assistant Secretary, that's right. Yes. Well,
and a former MP.
And a former MP, that's true. I keep on forgetting that. We'll talk about your seat later on the show.
The only Labor MP to ever lose a seat of Waterford, Stephen, might be though.
Fair enough. All right. Let's get into it. Now, what we're going to do, for folks playing along at home who are familiar with these types of episodes, the first episode really is kind of a foundation episode, laying the groundwork for folks out there that aren't so familiar with Queensland politics, and obviously those that are, but need a bit of a refresher. But each week we're going to unpack the campaign week that was, in terms of if there's any more polls come out, what does that mean, where the candidates or the leaders have spent their time, and what does that tell us, what policies have been announced and what that tells us, how the media are reporting it, and then we'll wrap up with our usual Tory with the typewriter award. But before we do all of that, in this episode, we're just going to give folks a bit of an overview of where we are as we head into this election campaign. The state of the race is there are 93 seats in the Legislative Assembly. 47 is the magic number. Labor currently in government with 51. The LNP have 35. That means they need 12 seats to form majority in the lower house. Katter has 3. The Greens have 2. We're going to do a bit of analysis of the electorate of... In fact, let's do the analysis of the electorate first, then we'll go to polling. Yeah, let's do that.
Sure.
I've already changed the run sheet before we've begun. Evan, you and I have spoken about this before off the air. You want to talk about the uniqueness of the Queensland electorate. And I may push back on this just for shits and giggles at one point, but tell us why Queensland is so unique as opposed to the rest of the country.
I think Queensland's always had like a unique electoral geography, Stephen. Like I think, since the 70s and 80s, Labor's done quite well in urban Brisbane. We've had a base of support there, but the stronghold, which sort of has held Labor governments together, has been a network of provincial city seats up the coast. Seats like, the seats around Cairns, Townsville, Mackay. Gladstone's been a bit of an anomaly, had a long time with an independent, but like the Labor formula for winning in Queensland has been an urban base around Brisbane and the outer suburbs, and then these, provincial city seats around that provide a backbone of 10, 11, 12 seats that get us into government. Essentially, you can't win a Queensland election without having some presence in those provincial cities.
One interesting fact that people often don't realise is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are more people living outside of Brisbane than there are living in Brisbane, which is unique to our states and our federation. Is that correct, or has that changed now?
No, that's true. Particularly if that relies on the sort of the big population of the Gold Coast too, which has traditionally been a place where Labor hasn't done well in recent generation. We haven't done well since probably 2012. Megan Scanlon has done an amazing job down there to hold the seat of Gavin, but we haven't had great representation on the Gold Coast, and there's 1 million people living on the Gold Coast. But there's also just a fact of life that those provincial city seats are all different media markets. They've all got their own TV. They've all got, they used to have their own print newspapers. That's all been collapsed with News Limited changes. But it is like, for campaigners interstate, it's that many media markets and that many provincial cities is closer to like a federal election campaign structure than a Sydney or Melbourne campaign structure, with candidates doing TV in so many different places at the same time.
Jackie, can I ask you, from take your lived experience of campaigning from back in the days when you were working out of Peel Street all the way through to then being a politician and in the government, has the approach to how you campaign in Queensland evolved around this idea of these different media markets, these different regional centres? And I ask that because obviously, media doesn't, well, I would argue that media doesn't play as a critical role in campaign communication as it once did. People are consuming their news in different ways now and less reliant on the Rockhampton Bugle.
Bulletin.
Thank you. I knew you.
The Rocky Bulletin.
I was hoping they had a publication. Do they still have is that still going?
Yeah.
Daily?
Yeah.
Wow. There you go.
And it's all owned by the Murdoch Press. So, yes, there are 7 media markets and there are dailies in all of those media markets, but they're all owned by the Murdoch Press. And so Evan is totally right. To understand Queensland, you have to understand that it is the most decentralised state in Australia, and it is the state that has the most urban centres with populations in those towns, in those cities, of over 100,000 people. So that means that there are strong local identities in those communities, and what the dailies do is they serve those local identities. So in Townsville, for example, it's got a huge industrial base. It's got a huge army base, the biggest army base in Australia. And so it really does, those dailies serve to reinforce that local identity. And I think for Labor, for the Labor Party, for Labor campaigners, the stronger a local candidate has in terms of their identity, their profile, their community credentials, the more hits they get in the local media. I think that's really important currency in terms of how we campaign in Queensland. For example, Michael Healy in Cairns, he really knows how to work his local media market, and he's such a Cairns identity that really helps us campaign in that community, in that seat, and across that region. I think it's critical and important to understand that Queensland is decentralised. It has a big urban region in the southeast Queensland corner, but people from the Gold Coast don't see themselves as part of Brisbane. They may be part of the region, the bigger region, and they might, benefit from the general economic, trends in the region, like, big infrastructure projects, the Commonwealth Games back in 2018, the Commonwealth Games in 2032. The whole region will benefit, but they still don't see themselves as part of Brisbane.
Mm.
Yeah.
When I was sent up to Cairns in 2012, I learned quite quickly, I was there for 2 months, I think, that far north Queensland is different to northern Queensland. That was the first thing I learned.
100%.
And the rivalry that exists between those two, Cairns and Townsville.
And there's also, I think in that, Stephen, there's also a big demographic difference, right? Like Cairns has, where Townsville has industrial base, Townsville has an army base, Cairns has a university and a services sector and a tourism sector. Cairns has a very different political culture and a very different market to Townsville. It is extraordinary, the difference between the two largest cities outside of Brisbane.
But if someone from from WA or Victoria, New South Wales would probably make the same arguments about their regional centres as well, the diversity between folks living in Traralgon who are reliant on, coal production is different to the cafe sipping academics and service workers living in Bendigo or Ballarat, or the agricultural communities that are living in Warrnambool, or the wheat communities that are living in Mildura. And I've used Victoria as an example there, but I'm sure that New South Wales, you could extrapolate it even more because it's such a bigger state. Isn't it just because the actual physical size of Queensland is so massive and is also populated is the main uniqueness of it. But the people that live amongst them really is kind of similar to what the rest of the country is like anyway.
Yeah, so what I would say, Stephen, is it's about the density of cities. It's about the density of the population. It's about the density of the different media markets. So I think, yes, you're totally right. People who live outside main urban centres or outside of cities in regional locations will always see that, there's a difference between them and Melbourne, for example. But I guess in Queensland, it is the size, it is the density of all of those cities, it's the density of all of those, populations and the issues. So I suspect that in terms of the number of regional seats in the Victorian Parliament, it's probably not as many as the Queensland regional seats in the Queensland Parliament as a proportion of the makeup of the Queensland seats. But I'm happy to be corrected on that.
No, I think you're spot on there. They are far more denser. How many electors are there on average per state seat in Queensland?
I think it's up to high 30,000s now.
Yeah, okay. So similar to ours is sort of 35 to 45 here in Victoria. So, very similar. So to that point that you were making before, Jackie, and I want to turn to polling now. If the local identity, if the local candidates that the major parties select have strong connections with that community, is that a way of strategizing around if the government or the party brand at a state level is not as strong as it had been in previous elections, and we'll look at the polls in a moment, is it then you're reliant on the fact that, you know, so-and-so in Rockhampton has got strong relationships with those electors, in that he or she will be saying to those voters, I know you might not be happy with what's going down in Brisbane, but you need me. The relationship that I have with you is far greater than what you're thinking about what the decisions have been made in Brisbane. I mean, is that the way that Labor should be able to buck what we're seeing in the polls at the moment?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think that it will mean something in some seats outside the southeast Queensland corner. I think that Bundaberg, for example, there's been quite a bit of commentary around Bundaberg, but what we have in Bundaberg in Tom is someone who is incredibly popular locally, and an LNP candidate who is not so popular locally. And it's not just popularity, it's also a bit of tribalism. People see Tom as one of theirs. And he's seen as effective, because what Labor governments do, and they do really well, is they understand how to underpin electoral success with good public policy and good infrastructure and service investment in those local communities. I mean, I think that if you have a look at some of the debate, and I know that we'll get to that later in the conversation, one of the most compelling stories that was told over and over and over again when I was in opposition throughout all of those regional communities was the devastation wrought by the axing of services in those local communities. So, for example, in Roma, Campbell Newman and Crisafulli sacked 40 workers, but those 40 workers had 40 families. And those 40 families had a big economic impact on the local community. Everyone knew each other, and the sackings had a really profound personal profile, or they had a face and a name and, you know, ambitions for their local community and their lives. So what you need is a local candidate who can tell those stories, you know, and I think that you have in someone like Tom a strong champion and a Labor government that's restored services, that's been able to show the people of Bundaberg that we care about them. Whether or not that's going to be enough, given, you know, the length of time Labor's been in government, given all of the issues, that's yet to be seen. But I think, yes, I think strong local candidates matter, and the tribalism and people saying that they are one of them is really critical and important.
We've got 2 rounds of polls that have come out, one by Freshwater, one by Newspol, and the sampling was done, broadly speaking, the Newspol one was from the 12th to the 18th of September, and the Freshwater strategies was 26th to 29th of September. So actually, when you think about it in the life of a campaign, a while ago, and I don't know if any new ones have come out subsequently, but it has Labor's primary on 30, both polls, the LNP's primary 32, 33, Greens on 12, One Nation on 8. Didn't survey Katter, others hovering around 7 and 8, and then a 2-party preferred of 44 to 45 for Labor and 56, 55 to the LNP. Not great numbers. However, I will say this, the Labor primary has actually increased there hasn't been a lot of polls in Queensland in the last 12 months, but the Labor primary actually has jumped 5, 6, 7 points. That's the first part of hope I saw from this most recent round of polls. But I'll go to you, Evan, first, and I might come to you, Jackie. What are you taking away from what we're seeing in this current round of polling?
Yeah, I think it's probably the type of polling you'd get when you've got an opposition who've managed to stoke grievances but not win a big argument, right? Like, you can't see their primary skyrocketing. And I think what you've been able to see is, as we've got closer to the election, some of that scrutiny on Crisafulli has meant that there is like a Labor primary solidifying. You know, I think it still is pretty hard going for the Labor team. They've got a long way to go. But I think they are they have managed in the last couple of weeks to solidify a Labor base to work from. And I think you can see the LNP's strategy of small target and grievance to the end, I think, has left it a bit vulnerable. That Labor, if Labor keeps picking up a couple more primary votes, what would have 4 weeks ago been a big win starts to become a much closer result.
Jackie, your reflections on this most recent round of polls?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I agree with Evan. There is a slight uptick in Labor's primary vote. And I think, I would be interested to see how things are travelling now. I mean, that's almost a month ago. And you're right, Stephen, these polls look like they were a long time ago. And what I guess firing the starter's gun in a campaign means is that people have got to start paying attention. And there's still a level of inertia out there. I went out door knocking on the weekend. And I think it's safe to say that, people pay attention to stuff like politics when they've got the bandwidth in their life or when they're prodded to do it. The start of the campaign means that they have to start paying attention to it and have to start making a choice. And I think that if we, going on Evan's important point, once the choice proposition is put to people, particularly when we've seen David Crisafulli under pressure and not performing very well, his small target strategy actually smells of a secret strategy for government, and that is actually, I think, very scary for people. So if enough people are actually concerned about what the choice means in terms of their daily lives, then I think hopefully that will translate into a bit more support for Labor. But you're right, it's difficult.
Let's turn to this choice and this contrast, and I want to start first of all with sort of the broader campaign narratives, and then we might move into. Let's start to talk about the leaders first of all. Jackie, Stephen Miles has been in the job not that long. But certainly from the perspective of a Victorian a long, long way away, has hit the ground running and, is leaving nothing to chance. And I really respect that. Your reflections on his overall performance thus far and heading into the campaign, what does he really need to lean into to give himself a chance to get re-elected?
Yeah, look, I 100% agree with you, Stephen. I think that between Stephen and Party Campaign Secretary Katie Flanders, I think they have decided that they are not going to be left wondering whether or not there was more they could do. Stephen has absolutely hit the ground running. I know, from my own experience, having worked with Stephen, he is absolutely in politics for all the right reasons. He cares. He cares about people. He cares about the environment. He cares about the legacy that he leaves for his kids and other kids. So he is absolutely in politics for the right reason. And a lot of the things that I think were in the too hard basket when he was still Deputy Premier were resolved quite quickly. And Stephen, I think, has been incredible in terms of his advocacy around the cost of living stuff, which is where a lot of Queenslanders are really feeling disgruntlement. So the 50-cent fares, that's all Stephen. He cares about climate change. He knows that, when you do things like this, it makes an enormous difference to getting cars off the road, and it's been enormously popular. Popular with him even. He took the bus up to Government House to get the writs issued for the election. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But,
I've been reminiscing, Stephen, about Stephen Miles moved a free public transport motion at Young Labor conference in 1998 and was, finally had to wait, 26 years to get his Young Labor motion implemented as policy as Premier.
See, you are a geek in that way.
That's why we brought him on the show. And good message to any of the Young Labor people listening to this podcast. It's a slow, long wait to get what you want. You need to be patient in this game, and Stephen Miles has certainly proven that.
Well, wait until we start talking about abortion. It's an even longer wait. So I think Stephen has done an incredible job, and he should be. He absolutely needs the acclaim that's deserved of him in that respect. And if we're left wondering anything, it's what more could have been done with a bit more time.
Evan, let's talk about the opposition. The leader for the LNP is David Crisafulli. I was up in Queensland, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and I just got the sense from folks that he was like trying to corner him was like trying to pin shit to a wall. How it was described to me. Just give us your reflections on this bloke.
Like the LNP in Queensland have been a schmozzle for a long time. Like they have, people might remember, like in 2006, day 2 of the state election, they couldn't name who would be premier if they won the election. There's this incredible disunity that they've had. Usually every electoral cycle that we've had with the LNP for the last 20 plus years, midway through, we have a breakout, have a leadership challenge, we have, some rural MP making homophobic comments and some urban MP wanting to privatise something. And Crisafulli has managed to instill a bit of discipline in their show and make them hungry to win. He has managed to pull off an incredibly disciplined LNP operation that has not committed on policy unless they absolutely have to, has not taken positions and sort of tried very hard to move the debate into like grievances about the past rather than putting anything for the future. Like I got to say, like, I don't know, Jackie, like usually the LNP hasn't been capable of pulling that off, but Crisafulli has managed to actually keep people to stop announcing policies of their own. He's actually managed to pull off the small target better than the LNP have ever been able to do, I suppose.
I would totally agree with you, but I think that, I don't think that the electorate has, it's yet to be proven, and I could be proven wrong, but there is this residual memory around Campbell Newman doing exactly the same thing. So lots of grievances, Campbell Newman running around with his 5-point plan that was going to address every single grievance in Queensland back in 2012. But what people understood then took place was this absolute carnage in terms of public services and public infrastructure, and the state went backwards. So there's this residual memory, I think, out there in the electorate. And Crisafulli's small target strategy, I would say to you, is starting to unravel if you look at the events of this week. It got him so far, but I think being unable to explain substance makes people scared. And it actually also just gives the media more questions to ask, and that's his problem. I mean, I've sat in the parliament with Crisafulli, and I have got to say to you that he is a great showman, but I don't think he's a good leader, and certainly not a good leader of substance.
Yeah, I think without that substance, Stephen, the risk for Crisafulli is that there is just an LNP brand that is still damaged from that Newman period. We had Queensland had this period where we had Newman and Abbott both in this, quite, privatising cuts, fighting with every stakeholder in this quite intense period in 2012 through to 2015. And I think there is just like an underlying brand that the LNP can't be trusted in that space. Crisafulli's strategy has been to try and move past that by not putting a plan for the future together. But, I think there is that brand vulnerability that sits within Crisafulli. He literally sat around the cabinet table with Campbell Newman making these decisions, right?
Well, he went into the parliament and defended them. He went out publicly and defended them. He wasn't just part of the decision-making process. He defended them. And I can tell you that they will be making similar decisions because they have been running down or bad-mouthing the public service, and they will be making very similar decisions that will hurt out in regional Queensland, and he will be out defending them. So Crisafulli, might be a different leader to Campbell Newman, but he is surrounding himself with so many people who sat around the same table as Campbell Newman.
So I guess my question I want to ask you is that if you're constructing a contrast message about our opponents, where do you focus your energies on? And Jackie, can I go to you first? Because you just mentioned before about the things that have just transpired in the last week. Can you just give us a bit of an overview of what are those things that have transpired in the last week that would be useful in trying to unpack the challenge that we have, that is this secret leader that is Crisafulli?
I think in the first instance, on Sunday, you saw them launch their health policy. And on the face of it, it looked like big numbers. But it actually is a health policy that does not account for population growth and growth in the demand of services. So very quickly, Stephen and Shannon were out pulling it apart and actually talking about Labor's health policy and what was required in terms of meeting the population growth demand and the service demand, particularly out in the regions. So what that says to me is they actually haven't done the detailed work. They don't have the people of substance working on a policy that actually accounts for the future in Queensland. If they care about people, if they care about services, then they would be providing policy and policy that has integrity and robustness. That's not what we saw in health, and it's a cornerstone issue. Then we saw their revamped youth offender camps, boot camps, a policy that was trumpeted by Jared Blay, a person who refuses to enter into a debate with Queensland's Deputy Premier, Cameron Dick. So, I mean, someone who understands his less than overwhelming electoral appeal outside of his own electorate, but he refuses to debate his counterpart in the government. And so this boot camp was deeply unpopular. Boot camp contractors were awarded to Jared Blay's mates, donors who gave money to the LNP back in the Campbell Newman days. So what we're seeing here is the repackaging of a deeply unpopular policy. They just renamed it. Again, no policy robustness, no integrity in terms of accounting for, dedicated service provision around a keystone issue. And then to top it all off, they have not got their position clear on what they're going to do around abortion. You've got LNP MPs throughout the state turning up to forums, Right to Life forums, saying that they want to wind back abortion laws. You have Crisafulli saying he has no plans to do it. Not that he promises not to do it, but he has no plans to do it. Very different language. And then he was asked in a press conference yesterday after the Katter Party said that they would be introducing legislation to recriminalise abortion, whether or not they would support it. On 39 occasions he was asked a question about it yesterday in a press conference, refused to answer. That says to me this is a leader who has a secret plan to recriminalise abortion in Queensland, take away women's reproductive freedoms in Queensland, and is not being clear to the people of Queensland. It's either that or he can't control his own party that will tell him what to do on abortion law reform or abortion recriminalisation. So I think this is I felt like there was a turning point in the last couple of days. And what this has said to me, honestly, Stephen, is, as Evan has said before, they have been deeply chaotic, in every single election campaign. And to not get this straight in their own minds says to me that this is a problem for them. It's a deep, deep problem for them because, women's reproductive freedoms are very popular out there in the community, and they don't actually, it's inconsistent with their party values and their party position, and he doesn't know how to ride this.
And I guess all we're looking for is a crack in the wall, isn't it? Just to start to drive a bit of a wedge in there. Evan, with that information, that bad week, what do you, with your campaign director hat on, then take from that into the next couple of weeks?
I just think I see it as like an unraveling thread that the discipline that you need to pull off the style of campaign that he's trying to run, I just don't see how that style of campaign can withstand the LNP internal pressure. Like, he's asking a whole lot of LNP people to reject things that they fundamentally believe in. Like, he's asked, it'd be a bit like a Labor government telling its MPs it couldn't go out there and support the right to organise or union right of entry or something like that, right? Like, it's sort of a big ask. I see it as unravelling, and I see the scrutiny of Crisafulli starting from those press journos who had, I think, for a long time assumed that it would be a fairly easy ride, and now see that there is holes there that they need to poke and prod and get through. So, like, if I was the Labor campaign, I just think they have to, stick at it, knowing that every point of primary is piling on more pressure onto Crisafulli. It's meaning more of his backbenchers start to worry a bit more about their own seat and a bit less about winning new seats. And it's just going to make that discipline too hard. The thing about that type of campaign that Crisafulli is running is that you're taking a punt that you don't need to build a strong policy infrastructure early. So you're taking a punt that you're going into an election without a clear policy position, because you don't want people to talk about your position. But what that also means is that you've got nothing to stand by when you hit a bump in the road like this, and it just gets harder and harder and harder.
That's exactly right. But what it also means is it actually gives the media something to talk about. It gives the media more questions. And I think that it's an unravelling, but it's almost like, a bloody wound that unless you actually cauterise it, it's going to bleed you dry. And I think that the question for Crisafulli and, Evan, I don't know, I'd defer to you about your analysis as well, but I think in Queensland, when the Liberal and National Party merged, it wasn't a true merger. It was a takeover by the National Party, a deeply, deeply conservative National Party. There are no progressive Liberals in this state anymore. You did see them vote in 2018, 2 of them to decriminalise abortion. 3 of them to decriminalise abortion. But by and large, the Liberals of the urban dwelling within southeast Queensland are just National Party people. They're just National Party people, deeply, deeply conservative and deeply, deeply regressive. So they will vote to, start up tree clearing again, broad land-based tree clearing. They'll vote to recriminalise abortion. All of the things that people in southeast Queensland and electorates like Cairns just do not support. So the real question for the LNP is, I think, not can they win this election, but can they be more than a one-term government? Because once they get in and they start to do all the things that, the National Party of old want to see done, it will be inconsistent with the values of, Queenslanders generally, I think.
And even just on their governing, right? Like, in the last couple of days, you've seen Crisafulli has spent a long time making no policy commitments that he didn't have to, and literally has started blurting out like these incredible commitments that he's going to resign as Premier if there aren't fewer victims of crime under him than there are now. Like an incredible proposition. He's literally promised to reduce ambulance ramping by 30%. If there were easy policy solutions, the government would have taken them, right? Like, he started blurting out these incredible universal statements that I think are going to create a rod for his back if he does end up becoming Premier.
Well, the way they did it when Newman was Premier was they just manipulated the data and they hid the data. That's what happened. So, you can go out there and you can make wild claims like that, but are you going to keep the same level of data integrity and transparency in reporting as we're seeing now?
Incredible.
One of the things I'm interested to get your thoughts on is obviously Crisafulli is trying to run a tight ship Now, having the intentionality of doing that is one thing. Executing that is another. And something that's plagued the Liberal Party or LNP, I think, around the country for a number of years now is their inability to pre-select quality candidates, even in battleground marginal seats. And that comes back to bite them. And often we've seen at a state or a federal level that when there is a scrutiny applied to those types of candidates, then we discover the true, the veil is lifted behind the insanity that is the conservative politics in this country. And we saw that even in this week with a character by the name of Jacob Hairmeyer, who's running, he's a Logan City councillor, and he's trying to, what seat's he running in, Evan?
He's running in Waterford, the seat that I used to represent.
Waterford, that's
and now
right.
He's much better represented by Shannon Fentiman than anything I could ever do.
So, and I'm quoting here from the Channel 9 tweet, the LNP candidate has finally agreed to talk to 9 News after some bizarre scenes avoiding our questions, which is tying some sort of shady business practices that he has run with his father. And the 9 report constantly said, we're not suggesting throughout it, but someone tweeted, this is sort of who was the Tory candidate that couldn't name the 5-point plan for Tony Abbott?
Miguel Diaz in.
It was the Miguel Diaz moment, really, of this campaign thus far. And I think that if you're a TV journalist and you want to, there's more of these to be had.
Yeah, I reckon when a party thinks it's on a wave to win, you end up getting a lot of people thinking that politics is easy, that what they got away with at a council level will apply at a state level, and but it doesn't withstand scrutiny on day one. If you are going to put your hat in the ring, you've got to be prepared to stand up and answer those questions, right? Why does your father, who's been banned as a director, have a shareholding in, your company? And I suspect the other piece of that is that he's been talking up his company as a business for a long time, and maybe it's not as active as he said it was at the pub on a Friday night. I just think it's sort of the thing, like this is the point of an election where it starts getting serious and you do have to answer tough questions. Had he just been honest and answered the questions, it wouldn't have been the circus that it was on TV last night.
It's always the cover-up, never the crime.
Yeah, and it's just, I think sometimes in these moments people think politics is easy, and this is those moments of scrutiny where it proves who's really up for it and who's not.
And, in terms of campaign resources, what happens is the media unit for the Liberal Party, CHQ, spend most of the day, if not 2 days, on defence and not doing offence. Doesn't sound like they're doing much offence anyway, but they're having to do a lot of work in trying to cover their tracks and cover their asses. If our research team can start to expose a whole bunch of these, and I guarantee you, there's at least 6 crackers in this Liberal ticket that you could just roll out each day that just all of a sudden starts to plant a seed of doubt in the voters' minds about the Liberal Party other LNP, the new LNP, or are they still the old LNP, to the point that Jackie was saying before about harking back to the days of Campbell Newman, and it's just doubt. That is what you need when you walk into that ballot box, because you know who Labor is and you know what they stand for, and they're putting their cards on the table, versus a group that is secret and shady, and they're trying to cover their tracks for folks like Jacob Hairmeyer et al.
Yeah, I think it's that cycle where this is going to get tough, and I think for our team, they just need to keep applying that pressure every day, and every point of extra primary vote they get means more people are under pressure, more backbenchers start feeling like they need, on the LNP side, need to start breaking out, which has been their history in the past, right? And they'll remind people that they are the old LNP. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, here's one thing we haven't done, but we need to do before we close out today, is actually just talk about the 2 main campaign narratives. Jackie, I want to go to you first. What is the broad narrative that the Labor campaign is going to be pitching to the electorate over these remaining 3 or 4 weeks?
So I get a sense that, just generally from the from the Labor campaign, it is completely focused on cost of living. It's completely focused on supporting Queenslanders' services. So it's honestly that positive stuff. We've got our costings out there. We've got a plan for Queensland. We are focused on the future, and we are focused on supporting you through really difficult economic times. And on the flip side, in terms of the negative campaign, is essentially you can't trust Crisafulli, you can't trust the LNP, and basically we can't go back. So I think that's effective. I think that depending on how things play out in the next week. Don't forget, pre-poll opens on Monday, so Queenslanders will start voting on Monday. I understand that in terms of postal votes, there's been, about 50,000 already received by the Queensland Electoral Commission. So, it's really important over the next few days that message is crystallised. The LNP are just running on crime, essentially. So, as Evan said, this is their big bin fire, essentially. So if you give us government, we will sort out crime, and kids do adult, youth crime does adult time, that sort of stuff. So I think that resonates with a lot of people in Queensland, but it's not the full story. So the next couple of days are going to be really critical and important, I think.
I mean, their campaign narrative around crime has been designed around trying to make the election a referendum on Labor's time in government, not a discussion about what happens on Monday after the election. I've always thought, though, that crime is a nice way to stoke anger, get people feeling angry, but there comes a point where the public starts asking, hang on a sec, are you going to solve it? Is my vote for a politician actually going to solve the challenge? And it starts to look political. And I think that sort of is happening. I do think, by the looks of it, I think the LNP have lodged into a crime all the way to the last day of the election. Whereas, I sort of thought that what they might do is do crime as a grievance up until, week 1 and week 2, and then sort of look to an economic plan for the future and start talking about cost of living, which is driving people, to be, fearful for their pay packets. But I reckon they're on track to just do crime to the end, which I think is probably enough for a slim majority. It's not enough if they wanted to do economic competence for the future, they have a chance of getting a big, solid governing majority. I don't think crime at the end, sort of making people vote on grievance, is probably enough to get there. It probably makes the election pretty messy with people, probably drives up the third party vote too.
Yeah. I mean, we do have One Nation running in every seat. So there's a risk there, and Family First as well. I think to your point, Evan, I agree with you. I think they're going to run crime right up until the end. And if they were serious about having a positive plan for Queensland, they would have released their costings, they would have released their policies, they wouldn't be scrambling around for second-hand policies that were abject failures under the Newman government. It's going to be very interesting. The other thing about crime, and this is perhaps one of the unintended consequences of their really ramping up the youth crime issue, is that a lot of people have been having conversations around how difficult this policy really is. And even really conservative councillors in regional Queensland have been talking about the things that work, and it's not incarcerating kids. It's, really talking about the type of support you need to put around kids in order to not turn them into hardened criminals. And that's not what the LNP is talking about.
Is this an issue that's widely felt up and down the state? Because if you go back to how you win these campaigns, it's about appealing to these particular cohorts or groups of voters in these urban regional areas. Is this something that is an issue right up and down Queensland?
Look, it is an issue everywhere, and it is when you combine that around sort of the anxiety of cost of living, it sort of is sort of fertile ground for scare campaigns. But at the same time, it is something that's much more strongly felt in those provincial city seats, and particularly the media coverage in those provincial cities can really highlight, local instances of crime. Like, it is a genuine problem. It is a big issue, particularly in regional Queensland. But like, if the LNP strategy is just to like burn credibility in government in regional Queensland and get their way to majority, it might be enough for them. It just seems like they're going the easy option. It's sort of been their strategic choice for 25 years, right? And this is why they've always got caught up in one nation preference deals. Is they can choose to run a big economic argument and win seats in Brisbane and regional Queensland and create a governing coalition, or they can do the politics of grievance and try and get to a slim-based majority through grievance politics in regional Queensland. And every time they've done the latter. And I thought they might have been on track to do the big plan this time round and win seats in Brisbane, but I suspect they're on track for the latter, sort of a plan to sort of stoke grievance in regional Queensland and get to a slim majority.
Next week on the show, we'll start to unpack some of these sort of seat level analysis of the where the path to victory is for the LNP, or indeed where Labor needs to obviously be sandbagging and resourcing. But we'll hold that off for next week. What I wanted to ask you before we wrap up is there was a debate last week on Channel 9 between the two leaders, and I just want to get your reflections on how that went. I'm assuming that the debate's viewership in Queensland is no different to that of what it is at a national level or in Victoria, and that is like 8, maybe 9 people watch it, as opposed to maybe a debate in the United States, in which I think they average around, I think the number was like 30 million people watched the last debate. I was in the States for the last debate. I actually went to a debate watch party in a pub in Washington, D.C. that was packed. It was a completely different experience to watching a leaders debate here in Australia. A lot of fun. But let's talk about... Sorry?
Very jealous.
Oh, a lot of fun. And I was in DC, and it was like just full of Democrats, and people like high-fiving each other every time Kamala was hitting all her keynotes and laughing at Trump, talking about, Haitian immigrants eating dogs and cats and whatnot. Anyway, I'm sure that didn't happen in this debate. To you, Jack, actually, I'll go to you, Evan, first. Just give us a sort of a view of how Stephen Moles performed in this leaders debate.
I love Stephen's performance in this debate. He literally shirt-fronted Crisafulli on all the difficult issues that Crisafulli had been avoiding, like Crisafulli's history as a director of companies that went broke, his sort of, what he's going to do on cuts, what he's going to do on abortion. Like, you're right, like those election debates have more of an insider audience than a public audience. But I think it is a useful opportunity for Stephen to have Crisafulli locked in one place and have to answer questions. I think Stephen did a pretty good job of that, right? Like, I know not everyone loves that approach, but politics is really serious, right? Like, who wins this election runs the state, and like literally is, people's, it is a matter of life and death. So like asking people tough questions is a good thing. And I thought Stephen did a really good job of that. And I suppose it's just that discipline that Stephen had too of, pushing forward in the face of, Crisafulli's, Crisafulli tries to paint a hopeful agenda and it's all essentially negatives, right? Like, he does that thing that the Greens do where they pitch up what sounds like a positive agenda, but it's actually an inbuilt critique of your opponent, of Stephen moving past that and trying to get onto the campaign theme of what actually matters, which is getting stuck in on cost of living when so many people are at home worried about it.
Jack, I'll ask you about what you thought about Crisafulli's performance, but in a moment. But just any other reflections on Stephen's performance in the debate?
Yeah, look, I totally endorse what Evan has said. I think I would only add that in the group of undecided voters that were asked to rate the leaders' debate and say who they thought won, they actually nominated Stephen as the winner. And I think that was well deserved. I think that in terms of Crisafulli, what we've seen is absolutely what Evan and I have been talking about today, and that is just an absolute lack of substance and, just this showmanship that I think electors are beginning to become a bit fatigued by. That is just one element of the total campaign, obviously. But when we put the two leaders side by side, what you have in Stephen is someone who is considered and compassionate and temperate and understands the detail and has substantial policy understanding and a desire to do good. What you have in Crisafulli is someone who has aspired to be a politician and premier from day one, has learned some tricks, has understood the grievances he needs to pursue in order to hold the government, to make the government vulnerable and weak. And that's what he's done. I mean, I think that his leadership is absolutely about his ambition and not about the people of Queensland, whereas Stephen's leadership is about the people of Queensland, not his ambition, because quite frankly, I mean, he's got the hardest job in the show, right? Like, it is a very big ship to steer around, and he has stepped up to the plate, and he's absolutely, in terms of the debate, acquitted himself really well.
Is there scheduled for another debate?
I think there's two more, isn't there, Evan? Is there two more?
Yeah, I know there's like the General Media Club debate next Wednesday, I think, and there might be one more.
I think there's one more in the final week.
To be televised.
And if I was Stephen, I'd be asking for as many as possible, right? Like when you've got an opponent who's trying hard to avoid the difficult questions, any opportunity to get in front of people and, make them answer is an opportunity to be taken.
Yeah, bloody oath.
Debate with just Queensland women.
Yeah, well, exactly.
That's actually a good idea.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to point out as well is, and Jackie, you have a great sense of this from your own experience being in the government. Campaigns are tiring, and you need to be campaign fit. And that means the early mornings, there are late nights. There's a lot of detail you got to be across. There's a lot of scrutiny, a lot of intensity, a lot of hand holding, a lot of running around, and it's exhausting. And so if you're not fit going into a campaign, you're going to get caught out eventually, because eventually you get tired. And when you get tired, you misspeak. And when you misspeak, you start to cause issues, and then it all starts to unravel. And what I get a sense from Stephen is campaign fit. He looks like he's campaign fit. I don't know whether or not Crisafulli is campaign fit because it's early in the race, but this is what we're going to find out. And the reason why I ask about that is there more debates. It's just more opportunities to put the blowtorch on him, and then for him to hopefully start to show, reveal this secret plan that he has for Queenslanders. And it's a long game. So I am interested in getting a sense about, is this Crisafulli guy, he might be polished, but will he be polished in the third week of the campaign after, only getting 4 hours sleep night after night after night, and then starting to feel a bit of pressure from journalists, from our campaign, and from his own people who are starting to get a bit itchy feet, right? And that's something that I think is something I'm looking forward to watching over the course of our time together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Stephen has been in the job now for, 10 months, and he actually understands what it means to have those early mornings, have the late nights, have to deal with 50 significant decisions a day, have to deal with the fact that there's outbreaks internally and how you manage them. So absolutely, Stephen is campaign fit. And, he also understands what it means to take care of yourself physically. And I think that's abundantly clear to people. But I think with Crisafulli, as you've seen and as we've alluded to or directly spoken to this whole conversation, I mean, he has run a small target strategy. His policies are, thin and weak and don't stand scrutiny, and he won't stand and defend them and talk to them in detail. So what that tells me is he's gone for the light touch in terms of his performance and his leadership in terms of, being an opposition leader. Now it's actually about him being the premier in waiting. And does he have what it takes? Well, considering his performance yesterday, when asked on 39 separate occasions what he would do in terms of abortion and whether he would recriminalise abortion and give a conscience vote to his team, he refused to answer. So that tells me he's actually not fit. He's not up to what it means to be Premier of Queensland.
Good segue for our last topic, which is the media and how the media are reporting this campaign. Jackie, just want to get a sense of and give context here. Like, so a good example, 2010 Victorian state election, the media just assumed that John Bradley was going to get re-elected, and they never put any pressure on Ted Baillieu and the Liberals throughout the entire campaign. And they said that privately in, all the chats after a doorstop or whatever. Hey, you guys have got it in the bag anyway, and there's not a lot of interest here. What level of interest does the media have in scrutinising Crisafulli, and how has that been playing out? Obviously, yesterday's a good example of that, but are we going to see more of that? How have you seen the media performing in this campaign?
Look, I have to say, and I think many viewers will be scratching their head around this, but look, I've seen quite a bit of the editorials in the Courier Mail, and I have to say they have been really running the line around the absence of detail from Crisafulli. And I have been surprised by that. I mean, I don't think they're going to editorialise for a returned Labor government, don't get me wrong, but I have been surprised that they have applied as much scrutiny and questioning as they have to date. So I think, that's been a bit of a surprise for me. Having said that, I've still got a lot of criticisms in terms of how they're, the election coverage. I think that in some of the regional markets, Cairns, for example, we've been getting a very good run in Cairns, and that's because I think Stephen and Labor, Katie Flanders in head office understand that we have got to stump up and work really hard in all 7 media markets. And we are doing that with substantial policy and a substantial record of achievement and delivery. And so we saw the pre-campaign launch in Cairns, and we got a really good run in Cairns on that basis. So the regional media market has been relatively good because we actually understand you need to front up, you need to work them hard, and you need to have something to say of substance to people. So I've been really quite, buoyed by that. But we also understand that there are different mediums. And I have to tell you this, I was having a conversation with my husband at home, and we were talking about Stephen. And my 16-year-old at the time said, "Stephen, is that Stephen Miles?" And I said, "Yeah, Stephen Miles. You know Stephen?" And I said, "Yeah, the guy all over TikTok. He's great." So Stephen is obviously resonating with young people. And even though Vincent doesn't have a vote, he's obviously really working hard on some of those other forums where alternate mediums where younger voters are accessing their information from and getting a vibe around the leader, right? Getting a vibe around the campaign. And I think, that's fantastic, the work that's been done on social media by Labor.
And we'll look into more of that next week as well, actually, when we've got a bit more time. So where the parties are spending a lot of their money. Evan, any reflections from you? And I'm also going to ask a question of you as who won the week and why?
Yeah, I reckon there has been a call for more detail out of Crisafulli for a long time, and he sort of has managed to avoid answering the media queries on that. I do think there's also been from the press gallery have been quite sceptical about Labor's critiques of Crisafulli and have been very quick to dismiss them as a scare campaign or political manoeuvres. And I think that in the last sort of week or two, we've seen what was, 3 weeks before that, they were described as scare campaigns. Now they're actually policy positions from the LNP, and they're actually real-life contests. So it's taken the journos a long time to get there. And sort of, I think they were signed up to a initial position of not buying into a Labor scare campaign. But I think, Labor's critique of Crisafulli has opened up some genuine cracks for those journalists now, and I think they are starting to get into those issues.
Who won the week this week, Evan, and why?
I got to say, I think Stephen and the Labor team won the week this week. They have held together their announcements. They had they've had a little hiccups with naming of candidates and the usual candidate making a weird comment on social media 10 years ago. But for the most part, Labor's had a strong policy position. They've done health announcements, they've done cost of living announcements, and they've stuck to their plan for the week. They've kept up the pressure on Crisafulli. And in that time, Crisafulli's had a meltdown on abortion. He's, they've been off script more time this week than not. I think, I think they've gone backwards this week.
Jackie?
Oh, well, I think definitely Stephen and Labor, based on the events of the past couple of days. I think that, Labor has been talking about these issues and flagging them as potential attacks on the LNP. And for Crisafulli to go out unprepared, it just demonstrates his arrogance around thinking that he can participate in a campaign to be leader of this state and not actually have a line on one of the most significant issues that women care about, women and men and families care about in this state. I just think it's pure arrogance, and that came through. That definitely came through in the debate. It definitely came through this week. So I think absolutely Stephen won the week.
Excellent. More of that. Last thing, nominations, which is our Tory with a Typewriter award that we do for all of these election campaigns. Bit of fun. Although David Feeney once has thrown out a curveball at me and had a trot with a typewriter. But anyway, that's David's preference as well. But normally let's...
Partial to that.
Hey, look, if you've found a trot with a typewriter, you can nominate them as well. I just don't read the Saturday paper, so that's why I wouldn't know. Let's go to... do you both have a nomination, first of all? Yes, you do. Lovely. All right. Jackie, do you want to go first? Who's your Tory of the Typewriter nomination for this week?
Well, I definitely have to say it's the Courier Mail and the journalist Hayden Johnson. When I woke up today, actually, and there was a headline that said Labor may put women last in allocating preferences, which is the most outrageous headline I have ever seen, I think.
And that's saying a lot.
That's saying a lot. When you think about what Labor has done in this state around a whole range of things, from reproductive freedoms to, cost of living relief, to maternity services in the regions spearheaded by Shannon, like so much, particularly things like free TAFE courses, free university places for nurses, more nurses in public hospitals. Like, this is an outrageous headline. And, yeah, it elevated me this morning in a not so good a way.
What's his name? Evan?
Hayden.
And a man telling women that they're going to be put last. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Hayden. Evan, who's your nomination for Tory of the Typewriter this week?
It is my friends at the Australian, Stephen, and it is Lydia Lynch, who wrote an article on the 19th of September describing Labor's questions about abortion as a last-ditch ploy to save government and a scare campaign, which I think over the last 48 hours has proven to be a genuine debate about a piece of LNP chaos. So I think sort of Lydia got in early and probably made the wrong call, I reckon.
Congratulations, Hayden, and congratulations, Lydia. You've received a vote each in our Tory with the Typewriter Award for this campaign. Before we wrap up and say goodbye to our guests, one bit of housekeeping, one bit of action. Housekeeping, obviously we're back next week with our second episode of the Queensland election preview with Jackie and with Evan. Look out for that. But we're also beginning our US election preview episodes as well. We're doing 4 of those, so they'll start next week. So you're going to get 2 episodes next week. Going to be a busy boy. And this other piece of action is for those of you that are in Queensland that listen to the show that need to get on a campaign, look in the link for today's episode. There's a link to volunteer for Labor at this election campaign. As Jackie said earlier in the show, voting begins on Monday. So it's not just election day anymore, folks. Election day basically runs for 3 weeks or 2 weeks or however long it is until the poll. 2, thank you. So we need to get out there and talk to voters. It is the most effective way that we can use our resources to create change in this campaign is now going to talk directly to voters. So jump on a campaign, volunteer your name and your details. A field organiser will give you a call, either making calls or knocking on doors. That's what you need to do. There's nothing else to do. We don't need policy pats and strategy Steves anymore. All that work is done. Now it's just talking to voters. So please give over 2 hours of your time to knock on 30 doors. Jackie Trad, Evan Moorhead, thank you so much for kicking off our first of 4 episodes. This has been a lot of fun. We covered so much, but we have so much more to cover over the next couple of weeks. Jackie, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And Evan Moorhead, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Stephen.
And we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And to get all the latest on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday.